let's take our seats and we'll start. We're just after 5:30, and we'll begin if everyone's ready. I declare the Council Agenda Briefing Forum of the 13th of October 2020, held in Council Chambers at the City of Subiaco, open at 5:34 p.m. I welcome councillors, staff, the media and members of the community. I'll just wait for you to sit down, I'll do the acknowledgement. On behalf of the City of Subiaco, I acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people as the traditional custodians of this area. We recognise their connection to the land and waterways of Subiaco and their continuing contribution to our city. Welcome everyone. Please note that we are being live streamed and recorded. By being present at this meeting, members of the public consent to the possibility that their image and voice may be live streamed to the public. Confidential sections of the council meeting will of course not be live streamed or recorded. Recordings that are not confidential will be made available following the meeting. So councillors, we're at item 2, attendance, apologies and leave of absence. I know we have a leave of absence from Councillor McMullen. Has anyone heard from Councillor Rowe? Okay. So we'll come to item 3, disclosures of interest. Councillor Davis, I understand you have a financial declaration.
Yes, thanks, Mayor Taylor. I, Councillor Davis, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting to be held on the 20th of October, agenda item C1. The type of interest I wish to declare is financial, pursuant to section 5.60A of the Local Government Act 1995. The nature of my interest is my practice is the applicant. I understand the above information will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting and recorded by the Chief Executive Officer in an appropriate register.
Councillor Hammersley, do you have declarations?
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. Yes, so I have 2. The first one is item C4, and I'm going to do a proximity declaration for this meeting. However, there is some factual uncertainty about whether I do have a proximity interest, and so my declaration may change for the actual council meeting. But to be cautious, I, Angela Hammersley, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by council at its meeting to be held on 13 October 2020. It's agenda item C4. The type of interest I wish to declare is proximity pursuant to section 5.60B of the Local Government Act. The nature of my interest is I am the owner of a residential property at 3183 Roberts Road, Subiaco, which sits opposite the Bob Hawke College. As C4 concerns a proposed development, I understand section 5.6B1C of the Local Government Act 1995 applies. Whether and if so, where any boundary of the land on which Bob Hawke College sits, to which my property is proximate, and the land where it is proposed to place the hard court sit is not clear to me. I'm therefore not entirely sure that section 560B2B applies. However, in case it does, I am declaring a proximity interest and will not participate or vote, will not participate in the matter tonight. That's my first one. The second one is I, Angela Hammersley, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting to be held on 13 October 2020. It's agenda items 7 and 7.1. The type of interest I wish to declare is proximity, pursuant to section 5.6B of the Local Government Act 1995. The nature of my interest is that I own a residential property at 24 Catherine Street, Subiaco. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further disclosures of interest? Councillor Nash.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. I have a declaration of interest for item C2. I, Derek Nash, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting to be held on the 20th of October 2020, agenda item C2. An impartiality pursuant to Regulation 11 of the Local Government Rules of Conduct Regulations 2007. The nature of my interest is I am a social member of the Daglish Tennis Club, adjacent to the application's subject lot. I understand that the above information will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting and recorded by the Chief Executive Officer in an appropriate register. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Look, this is a question about disclosures that I thought would be to the benefit of everyone in the room, and I couldn't resolve this myself. And this is whether we have to declare an impartiality interest because of our relationship, being a fellow councillor to Councillor Davis's, and on C1. Thank you. And whether we'd be just better off or putting in an impartiality interest or not. Oh, I beg your pardon.
Thank you, Councillor, and good evening, everyone. Another councillor has already raised this question with me tonight, and we both agreed that the fact that the question was asked is good enough reason to declare an interest. So I would generally agree. I mean, it could be argued that if you don't declare an interest, then the mere relationship with a councillor that has submitted an application could be inferred that you do have this invisible relationship, if you like. So I would recommend, when in doubt, declare an interest, and on that basis I would suggest that everyone declares an impartiality interest because the councillor has a development application before the council.
So, councillors, if everyone's now scrambling for a written declaration of interest form, on page 93 of your agenda, there is a prepared one if you need it. Sure, Councillor Stroud, and then I've got a few hands up, so if you're ready to go, we'll just get through them all. Councillor Stroud.
Thank you. I wish to declare an interest before Council this evening. I, Stephanie Stroud, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting to be held on the 13th of October 2020 in agenda item C1. The nature of my interest is impartiality pursuant to Regulation 11 of the Local Government Act and Rules of Conduct. The nature of my interest is Clopper and Davis represents the applicant of C1 and Councillor Davis is a fellow councillor. I understand that the above information be recorded in the minutes of the meeting and recorded by the Chief Executive Officer in an appropriate register, signed and dated on this day. Thank you.
Thank you. I, Rick Powell, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting to be held on the 13th of October. Agenda item C1. The type of interest I wish to declare is impartiality pursuant to Regulation 11 of the Local Government Rules of Conduct, Regulations 2007. The nature of my interest is one of the architects for the proposal is Matt Davis, a fellow City of Subiaco councillor. For the public record, I have no financial, industry or other association with Councillor Davis. I understand that the above information will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting and recorded by the Chief Executive in an appropriate register, signed today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I, Lynette Jennings, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its agenda briefing forum to be held on 13 October 2020, agenda item C1. The type of interest I wish to declare is impartiality pursuant to Regulation 11 of the Local Government Rules of Conduct, Regulations 2007. The nature of my interest is Councillor Davis is a principal of the firm, which is the applicant in agenda item C1, and he is a fellow councillor, and there may be a perception of possible partiality due to that professional relationship with me. I will consider the matter on its merits. I understand that the above information will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting and recorded by the Chief Executive Officer in an appropriate register, signed today.
Thanks, Mayor. I, Jodie Mansfield, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered at the agenda briefing forum to be held on 13th of October 2020, agenda item C1. The type of interest I wish to declare is impartiality pursuant to Regulation 11 of the Local Government Rules of Conduct Regulations. The nature of my interest is that Councillor Davis, as a co-business owner of Clopper and Davis, is also a fellow member of Council. I understand the above information will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting and recorded by the CEO in an appropriate register.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. I, Angela Hammersley, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting to be held on 13 October 2020, agenda item C1. Type of interest I wish to declare is impartiality pursuant to Regulation 11 of the Local Government Rules of Conduct, Regulations 2007. The nature of my interest is I'm a councillor who sits on the Subiaco Council with Councillor Davis, who has a financial interest in C1. I have no other relationship with Councillor Davis. Thank you.
I, Rosemary de Vries, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting to be held on the 13th of October 2020, agenda item C1. The type of interest I wish to declare is impartiality pursuant to Regulation 11 of the Local Government Rules of Conduct, Regulations 2007. The nature of my interest is impartiality because I am a fellow councillor and Councillor Davis represents the applicant. I understand that the above information will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting and be recorded by the Chief Executive Officer in an appropriate register.
I, Derek Nash, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting to be held on the 20th of October 2020, agenda item C1. The type of interest I wish to declare is impartiality pursuant to Regulation 11 of the Local Government Rules of Conduct, Regulations 2007. The nature of my interest is due to my profession. I know the principals of Clopper and Davis Architects, and I'm also a fellow councillor with Matt Davis. I understand the above information will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting and recorded by the Chief Executive Officer in an appropriate register.
I, Blake Phelan, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting to be held on the 13th of October 2020, agenda item C1. The type of interest I wish to declare is impartiality pursuant to Regulation 11 of the Local Government Rules of Conduct, Regulations 2007. The nature of my interest is Matt Davis is a fellow councillor, and Matt Davis is also the principal of the firm involved with the item. I understand that the above information will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting and recorded by the CEO in an appropriate register.
Thank you, Mayor. I, Murray Rowe, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by the Council at its meeting to be held today. Agenda item C1. I have an impartiality interest pursuant to Regulation 11 of the Local Government Rules of Conduct, Regulation 2007. The nature of my interest is I know the co-councillor involved in this item, namely Matt Davis. I understand that the above information will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting and recorded at the Chief Executive Officer in an appropriate register. Thank you.
I'll read out my declaration. I, Mayor Penny Taylor, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting on the 20th of October 2020, agenda item C1. I wish to declare an impartiality interest. The nature of my interest is Councillor Davis is a fellow elected member and is the applicant in this matter as part of his architecture business. And I understand that this will be recorded in line with everyone else's. Thanks. Any further disclosures of interest? No? Okay, we have no deputations for our public agenda briefing. So just before we start, we'll have a brief announcement by the CEO.
Thank you, Mayor. The conditions of entry and behaviour to the agenda briefing forum are contained in a statement displayed on the door on the entry to the chamber. Please ensure you are familiar with the conditions so that the meeting can be conducted at an appropriate standard.
Thank you. There's no announcements from the presiding member tonight, so we'll move straight into questions. Thank you, Councillor Davis. So, councillors, we'll move to the officer's report on page 2 for C1, number 20, Rawson Street, Subiaco. Do we have Councillor Mansfield?
Thanks, Mayor Taylor. Yeah, I did have a question about the demolition. So my understanding is that this dwelling doesn't make a contribution to the, doesn't have a heritage contribution, I guess. But it seems to me, and I'm looking at page 10, it seems to me that, and I'm clarifying my my thoughts on this, that demolition isn't possible until an approvable DA has been received. Can you just clarify that for me, please?
Manager for Planning Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. Yes, as this is within a heritage area, you do need approval for demolition, and in this instance, the actual proposal isn't considered to be consistent with the heritage area and its adoption, so therefore there is scope to not recommend demolition until the proposal is considered to be consistent. Generally, this is how character and heritage areas were dealt with before the regulations were put in for most single house areas. However, it's now only applicable to heritage areas.
Further questions on C1? Councillor Powell.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Through you to the officers, is the main problem with this proposal its location, as in being in a heritage area? If you could look at that first, and then perhaps some of the other compliance issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Taylor. In heritage areas, there are additional considerations to development. So the fact that this is within a heritage area, there are more considerations specific to that, and to protect essentially the character and fabric of that area.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. The proponents have said that they've met, I think, with the heritage architect, and they appear to believe that most of the difficulties have been resolved through amendments that they've made to the plan. This would appear that this is not the view of staff. Is that correct?
Thank you. And through you, Mayor Taylor. Yes, the applicant did make some amendments to the plan, which did go some way to addressing the concerns and the planning framework. However, the city officers still recommend refusal based on some significant departures.
Thanks, Mayor Taylor. Again, through you to the planning staff. Having read through the report, is one of the main, I guess, concerns that the city has with it the presence of the second story?
Through you, Mayor Taylor. Yes, that's one key concern. There are a few other concerns linked to that as well. However, that would be one of the major amendments that the city is seeking.
And could I just ask, sorry, just to follow on from that, so there are other two-storey dwellings within that precinct. Can you explain to me why the second story of this one is contentious?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. The main contention is the second story is not behind the main line of sight of the of what a single story would present as. The second story is larger than what's provided for in the policy. Now that can be considered. However, all the measures have to be considered, and also the roof form and pitch is not consistent with similar properties in the heritage area. Because it is a heritage area, it does have additional considerations.
Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on that question. As I read the report, I thought that it wasn't the presence of a second story that was the problem, but really that it was the presentation of the second story to the streetscape and the heritage buildings around it. Is that right? I mean, it's not. I mean, we've been allowing people to build two-storey houses for a long time, including in what might be heritage areas, providing. I mean, we used to have that middle of the block rule thing to try and keep the streetscapes. So, am I right in reading this? It's really the presentation of a two-storey house from the street, which doesn't conform with the known streetscape?
Through you, Mayor Taylor. Yes, that's correct. So there's this discretion to consider a second story. It's the shape, the form, the presentation of that second story that we're seeking additional amendments on. Some of that is a setback as well of the single story. So the roof form and pitch is another amendment that is sought as well. That all feeds in together in the officer's consideration.
Any further questions on C1? Councillor Rowe?
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. Has the applicant, if I could ask through you, please, has the applicant offered to push the bulk of the upper floor backwards? So that, I gather from this conversation we're talking about the visibility from the footpath and the gable angle, the angle of the gable being not consistent with the surrounds. But has the applicant offered to push the bulk of it back so it is visible, not visible from the street?
Through you, Mayor Taylor, we've had these discussions and recommendations, and the applicant has requested that the plans be considered as they are presented now.
Councillor Stroud.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I'm just interested in the report by Philip Griffiths of Griffiths Architects, and I'm just interested in this report. Were they representing the city? Were they approached independently to provide a heritage report for our benefit or guidance or whatever? Because they obviously, Philip Griffiths obviously has a contractual relationship with the city through the design review panel and so on. So could you just explain that to me, please?
Through you, Mayor, it's the we have a service here for properties within a heritage area, so it's independent advice provided to the applicant. So that advice is not advice from the city. It's they can choose from 3 architects, and that's independent advice provided to the applicant, and then they can choose what they'd like to do with that advice.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. So it's independent advice offered through the city. So we pick up the tab basically for that advice. It's a service that we provide. Sorry.
Through you, Mayor Taylor, that's an incentive of being within a heritage area.
I thank you, through you, Mayor. So now I have a question for governance. And the role of Councillor Davis in this, because he's declared a financial interest. He can't be part of the briefing. He can't be part of, obviously, the decision-making. However, it seems he now has used city services for this and was actually present at the meeting with Philip Griffiths. And I just wondered if we had a governance problem here. Thank you.
CEO.
So, my first thoughts are that he's declared an interest in the decision-making process rather than the application process. And as a consequence, we know he's been party to the application process, and discussing matters with fellow consultants would be part of that process. But I think his main interest is ensuring that he's not part of the final decision-making process.
Thank you. It's just that our e-learning course just explains this differently, but perhaps that's for another day. Thank you.
Councillor Mansfield.
Thanks, Mayor Taylor. Just a question for the planning staff. So the western boundary abuts the right-of-way. And I guess I'm just sort of wondering, are any concessions given to side setbacks because it abuts the right-of-way?
Thank you. And through you, Mayor Taylor, they are seeking a 0.79 metre variation on the western setback. So that would be a discretion that's sought.
I had a general question. I'm not sure if under meeting procedures 4.7 and 4.8 I need to declare that I want to ask a question, but just in case we think that we should declare everything, I'll do that now. I'm just wondering, and it's just a question, so I'm wondering, Given that we debate heritage matters, at some length when we look at policies and plans and considerations around which properties are included or not on registers and in areas, does this sort of outline that if you buy a non-heritage house within a heritage area, the development application conditions will be more onerous? Because that is a question that we've received from time to time.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor, there are additional development requirements in a heritage area, and they are essential in ensuring that heritage area is preserved and protected. There are other incentives and mechanisms where development can be allowed, so it might be a little bit more onerous depending on that area. However, we think that in most cases there could be a good design achieved.
Thank you. Yep, Councillor Nash.
Through you, Mayor Taylor, am I correct in saying that the height of the roof pitch, proposed roof pitch at 5.9 metres is, of the ridge of the roof, at 5.9 metres is 0.6 of a metre below the deemed to comply maximum ridge height of a house?
Through you, Mayor Taylor, the building height is not considered to be an issue in this instance. While they are seeking discretion to go to 2 stories, it's within the allowable limit for 2 stories. It's the actual pitch of the roof at 15 degrees and the flat roof elements as they present to the primary street.
Is it not the case, though, that a single-storey house can be built, the ridge of a single-storey house can be 6.5 metres above ground level?
Through Mayor Taylor, yes, that's correct. However, that house would also need to be set back appropriately with this policy.
I had a further question, so still continuing under 4.7 and 4.8 and being allowed to. I was wondering, when you talk about on page 7 on a total of 3 submissions were received, I was just wondering how many properties were consulted and how many properties were represented by the 3 submissions?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor, this is a standard development application, so it would be adjoining properties. I would have to take the question on notice on which properties actually provided the submissions.
Any further questions? Councillor Hammersley.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Taylor. The question of heritage protection, my understanding was from the work that we've done in this area so far, is that actually under the State Government Act, law and policies, that responsibility for heritage actually lies with the local government rather than individual property owners. Can I have any information on that proposition? Question.
Through you, Mayor Taylor, yes, the local government is responsible for setting the planning framework for heritage areas.
If there's no further questions on C1, I'll move to C2. Did you have a question? Okay, let's do it then.
Thank you, Mayor. Sorry to jump in just the last moment like that. Through you, I see that various trees are saved on the property, which I think is a good outcome. And I just want to clarify, though, there's no actual requirement in the R codes, well, not that I could see, or perhaps there is in some policy, to retain the trees, or is this just a concession by the owners and architects? Thank you.
Through Mayor Taylor, there's no requirement to retain trees. However, the R codes do include landscaping and open space where you can put trees. So it's something that the applicant has proposed.
Through you, Mayor Taylor, the nil setback that's discussed in relation to the west boundary, I assume that's to the right of way that adjoins the property to the west. Is the setback when it's connected to a right of way not the one, I think half, or I think it's a maximum of 2, but the middle of the right of way? So in this case, it's probably a 3 metre right of way, so 1.5 metres rather than nil.
I think I'll take that question on notice. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry again to come in late, but the reason I asked that question before, because I thought I had seen a plan where the upper floor was not visible from the road when I looked at this earlier, and it hasn't got a page number, but in the attachments, the amended plan 22nd of the 7th, unless I've missed something, it shows the upper floor not visible from the footpath, a west elevation again, as was just mentioned. So are we definitely looking at the former plan, or why is this in front of us on the attachments showing that you can't see the upper floor from the footpath? One of these side elevations, the west elevations. Yeah, there is a drawing number A202, but that's what I thought. That's why I asked the question, because I saw this earlier.
Yep, thank you. And through you, Mayor Taylor, that was the elevation provided by the applicants. The city's assessment considers that you can actually see the second story element as measured appropriately with our local planning policy.
If there's no further questions, councillors, I'll move to C2. Yep. Councillors, we're on page 21, number 24, Troy Terrace, Daglish. Do we have any questions on this item? Councillor Hammersley.
Thank you. My overall question is, recently the city has enforced its planning policy 4.2 in respect of a development in Luty Avenue, and it may be a question on notice, but it would be helpful to hear from the planning staff how they would distinguish this proposal on a factual level from the one in Luty Avenue.
Thank you. And through you, Mayor Taylor, in the Luty Avenue proposal, the officers recommended approval to the flat roof form. And in this proposal, the reason why it's recommended approval is because it's on the rear laneway and there's a varied roof form and pitch there, so there's no character or no homogeneous character of roof form or pitches. There's a variety through that, so it's still behind the line of the site of the primary residence from the primary street, and it's at the rear of the dwelling, so there's no primary street roof considerations.
Further questions, Councillor De Vries?
Through you, Mayor Taylor, this is a question for the Manager for Planning Services. There's some suggestion that that the line of sight where the development isn't visible is directly below, but if you move a little bit to either side, that the development will be visible from the front of Troy Terrace. Can you just give me some more information about that? Because from the picture it looks as if there's no visibility at all. The other question relates to the solar access in the next adjoining property, that they've suggested that during winter there will be no 65% of their land will be covered by shadow between the hours of, I think it was 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. So just some updates or some further information on that would be very helpful. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. And through you, Mayor Taylor, with regard to the visibility of the addition, in accordance with the policy, it won't be visible from the primary street. And with regard to overshadowing, the additional overshadowing will be projected onto the right-of-way, and there won't be any additional overshadowing to the neighbouring property. So that's on page 29 of the agenda.
Through you, Mayor Taylor, just one additional question. Any development that's being observed from Hickey Street, so that would be as it's being built and after it's built, is that a planning consideration at all, that it can be seen from Hickey Street? Thank you.
Thank you. And through you, Mayor Taylor, the consideration is primarily from the primary street, so as a single and as the houses are viewed and they front to that street. Generally, if it's to do with secondary streets, it's a little bit more difficult unless they're in a heritage area, for example, where you can require that. But even then, you need to have some sort of consideration on secondary streets.
Yes, thank you, through you, Mayor. I think this might be the first time in my time as a councillor where the view from the back lane or the back of the place has some relevance because of its opposite public open space. So is a streetscape the only consideration when it's the primary street, and can we consider a streetscape presentation from the back of the home when it's overlooking a park or a public open space? Thank you.
Through you, Mayor Taylor, rear laneways are generally used for access and garages and parking. So if you're required a single house to have a streetscape to every side, it is really difficult to consider that. It's not considered to be unsightly to the public open space element, so look, there needs to be somewhere where accesses can go. Rear laneways are the right place to do it, and you wouldn't be wanting to have the same streetscape in a rear laneway. It's impossible to achieve.
Yes, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the rear laneways, the service, and so on. It's more the general view from a public open space, and so it sounds like the city has, or the staff have considered that because they're suggesting it's not unsightly. So can I just have confirmation that that consideration has been given nonetheless, even though it's from a rear laneway? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, and through you again, Mayor Taylor. That's considered, I believe, on page 31 as well. So it has been considered.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. I'm on page 28, just looking at the setbacks. It says in here, with regard to bulk and scale, the 0.65 metre setback is commensurate to the existing wall. I was wondering, the existing wall of what? Is it the existing wall on the property or the next door neighbour or what?
I won't hold this up. I'll take that one on notice as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And in the next stop point, speaks about the 0.65 metre setback will allow for adequate ventilation. I gather that the normal setback is 1 metre. I'm just wondering why it's 1 metre if 0.65 is adequate for ventilation. Why else? What's the purpose of a wider setback on a side boundary?
Thank you, through Mayor Taylor. The calculation of setbacks is in accordance with wall height and distance and length through the R code, so that it's based on the deemed to comply in the R codes, and yeah, that's the answer.
Can I just clarify then, there's no other issue around setbacks on side boundaries other than ventilation? Is that the message that's being carried here?
Through Mayor Taylor, no, I mean, there are building bulk setbacks as well, issues to be considered as well. So ventilation is one, and that's considered in the design principles. So when considering a variation, that's something to be considered. But setbacks are for a variety of reasons and not just for ventilation.
On to the next page, page 29, there's mention that there is an example of a two-storey development built up to the rear boundary at 17 Munsey Avenue. I was just wondering, you might have to take this on notice, when that build was approved.
Councillor Jennings, did you have a question?
Thank you, Mayor. It's a tree question through you to Manager of Planning Services. I'm looking at the attachments to the agenda briefing documents, and it's PDF page 37. It's the site plan. And in the top right-hand corner or section of the back of the property, it's saying there's a big tree to be removed. Is that being removed, do you know, because it's actually in the way of, I just couldn't quite see that. Well, you don't see where the base of the tree is. It looked like it might perhaps be where part of the new development or the extension is proposed. But so there's that question. And also, was there any discussion with the owners about, you know, trying to retain that tree if it's healthy and, you know, in good condition and it's not a hazard or anything? Was there any discussion with planning staff and the owner and designers? Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. I don't believe there were any discussions, and I'll double check. Council doesn't have a tree retention policy, but it's something that we're working on. I believe the tree needs to be removed to allow the development to go ahead. That tree can be removed also without the development going ahead as well, as some private property.
Further questions, Councillor Hammersley?
Yep, hopefully this is my last. I'm on page 33 in the conclusion, and it says the proposal is considered to positively contribute to the streetscape. And I just wrote on my notes here how, and I didn't really see a discussion earlier in the paper about positive contribution to streetscape, and I was a little bit confused by the proposition that you can't see the building from the street with it makes a positive contribution. So can that be explained?
Thank you. And through Mayor Taylor, it is an improvement to the rear right-of-way in that context of the streetscape, not the primary streetscape.
Yes, thank you, through you, Mayor. Back to page 27. It's in regard to the skillion roof. My understanding was that, in fact, the report says that most of the homes in this area do have pitched roofs, which I think is probably in the 30 to 32 degree area. So why is a skillion roof, which apparently is only not going to be visible from the street, right in front of the house, but is visible throughout, according to the neighbours, throughout most of the rest of the area, why is that an acceptable outcome?
Thank you. And through you, Mayor Taylor, the preservation of the primary streetscape is to consider the existing roof pitches. There needs to be some variation and interesting development. So there's no reason why a skillion roof isn't considered an acceptable form of development, especially when it's at the rear right-of-way. So it adds to a contemporary development outcome and maintains the streetscape that exists there. It distinguishes a new build from the character building as well. So just because it's not a pitch roof doesn't mean it can't be considered, especially in the context of the rear laneway.
Councillor Davis.
Thanks, Mayor Taylor. It's a question for the Manager of Planning Services again. I note in the drawings that the overall building height from the lane is approximately 6.44 metres. That's the highest point, to the top of the skillion. Is it true to say that what's permissible as a two-storey building with a pitched roof is 9 metres in height, which is some 2.56 higher than the current, 2.56 metres higher than the current proposal?
That's correct. A pitch roof would necessitate a taller building, up to 9 metres.
If there's no further questions, any further questions, I'll move on then to C3. C3 on page 34. Recommendation to prepare a scheme amendment number 1 to the local planning scheme number 5. Any questions on C3? If not, I'll move on to C4. Okay, so we'll move on to C4 and Councillor Hammersley's leaving the room. If she can. So questions on C4, councillors? Councillor Mansfield.
Sorry, thanks, Mayor Taylor. Look, I do have a couple, and it is because I'm kind of confused. So maybe I could ask for some clarification about where the negotiation process is at between the city and Development WA or the MRA in relation to the city developing a sea smurf or similar kind of facility. Because if I could get that answered first.
Who'd like to take that question?
Thanks for the question. Through you, Mayor Taylor, I think it was back in July or August where Council made a decision to do some more work to de-risk the co-shared multi-use recreation facility project and to try and secure some better terms with the state government. I think the feeling from Council was that the proposal that the state had put forward was not commercially viable for the city, and it wasn't in our interests, and we needed to do some more work to get a better outcome. So about a week or two after that council meeting and that decision, we sent a letter to the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage. That letter was signed off by the CEO and the Mayor, and we put forward an alternative proposal for the community rec facility on terms that we felt were much more aligned with where council was at. That was a couple of months ago. We haven't heard anything back from that letter. Under the MOU between the city and the state government, there is an obligation on the parties to negotiate in relation to the rec facility. So as hard as we have been trying to secure a meeting with them and negotiate with them, we've really been stonewalled. So I'd like to report more progress on that. Unfortunately, they haven't responded to our last letter, and we're currently in the process of following that up with them with another letter. Thank you.
I've just got a follow-up question to that. Just because you use the words being stonewalled, we've sent one letter, we haven't got a reply. Is that what we're calling being stonewalled?
Thanks for the question. Through you, Mayor Taylor, we've now sent, I believe, 2 letters. The first one was in March. The next one was in August. Both of our letters, we requested a meeting with the Department of Planning, and we haven't received a response to that request.
Councillor Mansfield.
If I could ask another question, it is in relation to what's in the report. So the report suggests that the courts could be built in another location. I couldn't see what the city was sort of suggesting in terms of an alternate location, and I'm just wondering if I could get clarity on that.
Thank you. And through you, Mayor Taylor, officers understand that the development in Subiaco would likely start from the western portion and then work its way up, and that will take many years. We identified an opportunity where the Department of Community site is on Court Place, so with Subiaco Road and Court Place as a potential option for temporary courts, and another one was the West Australian Football Commission site and any other development site there. So that were the 2 ones that were discussed. However, the department has chosen this site.
Could I ask a question? So when they were so who were you discussing those alternate locations with, and what was the nature of the discussions?
So it was an early discussion to, through you, Mayor Taylor, to consider where the temporary hard courts could go. The city's position has always been to maintain this site where they proposed for a City of Subiaco community facility. So they were just discussions on potentially where hard courts could go.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. Just referring back to the first question, and where we've been told that letters were sent in March and August. It's now midway through October. It just seems really very strange to me that no attempt has been made to communicate with them and say, well, why the hell aren't you replying to us? To this agency that we're supposed to be in negotiation with. So can anyone from staff explain that, please?
would like to, because I did just hear further negotiations other than 2 letters, so I just want to make sure if we're, like the question to the first, the answer to the first question needs to be consistent with what's happened. Are you answering that? Or should I? Yep, okay, thank you, Manager for Property Services.
Thanks for the question. Through you, Mayor Taylor. So there are a few different parties involved here. The Department of Planning is essentially the landowner. And so in order for us to secure freehold tenure of that site, which I believe is what we want, they're really the party that we need to be dealing with. But at the same time, we've been in constant discussions with Development WA. We have regular meetings with them and the Department of Education. There have been discussions around the shared user agreement. So there's been a lot going on, but specifically in relation to the community facility and the question, you know, a number of months have elapsed and, you know, what's going on. You know, I guess as a courtesy, we do give the state government some time to respond to our letters. But as I said, we're in the process at the moment of following up on the letter that was sent in August. It's now been a couple of months and we're in the process of doing that.
Councillor Mansfield.
Yeah, so the staff recommendation is to not support the development of the hard courts on that site. What power, what effect does this have on the development, the decision of council on this matter? What impact will it have on the development of these hard courts?
Through Mayor Taylor, this will be council's submission to Development WA in considering the temporary hard court. So Development WA would be the decision maker, the Department of Finance and Department of Education jointly are the applicant, and council's submission will be considered in by Development WA. So they may take it on board, they may not.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. Through you, just 2 questions. If a C-SMRF was to go ahead and, well, presuming these courts were built and the C-SMRF was eventually negotiated and went ahead, then have we had any indication from the Education Department or the Department of Planning or Department of Finance what facilities would be available or what they propose to use for courts for the high school in the interim while the C-SMRF is built and the unavailability of the courts? Thank you. Oh, and the second question, sorry, I'll just ask that now while I'm on a roll. On page 51 of the agenda, there's a diagram of the courts and there's areas that are sort of got a green. Are they, what surface is that? Do you know? Is that a hard surface or is it grass or some other treatment? I'm just curious. I couldn't see what that is. Perhaps it's brick paving. Thank you.
Manager for Planning Service, did you get both those questions?
That's all right, through you, Mayor Taylor. So the allocation of courts should a community facility be constructed is something that we've actually outlined in the recommendation as a key issue going forward. So that would need to be negotiated with the Department of Education on those provisions. And in regard to your second question, I'm just trying to read that now, but I believe that's to bring that portion up to level. So that portion is likely to be grass and through the landscaping plan. There's no detail on that from this point, but I can double check and I'll take that one on notice.
I would just like to say about that, we're ending up with, you know, quite a bit of hard surfaces here, and it would be good if we could inquire and encourage them perhaps to make things grass, because it's going to be, you know, getting hot with all those hard surfaces everywhere and the heat island effect, etc. Thank you.
I've got a few hands up. I think I'll go with Councillor Stroud first.
Look, the letter we sent on the 4th of August was sent to Gail McGowan, our Director General, appropriately sent to her. It was an excellent letter, and we're now placed in this very difficult situation of Development WA now approaching, because they want to get on behalf of the schools to build these courts and so on. I'm wondering if there's any room here in terms of timing that we defer this decision and go back to the Director General explaining the situation, even providing a copy of this report and saying, look, you know, we need to know what future there is in the Smurf, because decisions have to be made, and a school's been built and they have their demands and so on. So, yeah, thank you, Mayor, through you, whether there's any possibility there to delay a response to this and get on with another letter.
Just before I ask the Acting CEO to comment, given that some of these things, like Council made a pretty clear indication to administration back in July to work with the Mayor to advocate for government support and government funding towards the CSMRF. I don't think we've done that to the best of our ability at all, and this report unfortunately shows what will happen, and that what happens is the state government and its agencies get on with what they want to do, and we don't get to say what we want. I will speak to it more because I don't really know how to frame these points and frustrations as questions. I'm concerned that why we haven't looked like CSMRF is a serious thing is because the council decisions have consistently not put money towards it, and we've consistently, in Subiaco East matters, have had contentious responses between ourselves, and we haven't literally voted to put money in, so it's hard to say to the state government, we want this. Explicitly, it's more like we want something, which is harder to argue for. With this matter, it does appear that the state government, or whichever agency I'm meant to be calling it, Development WA, is that correct? So Development WA is pushing ahead with the courts because school children are going to that school, and the school kids will be finished year 12 at some point, and they won't be there anymore, and so decisions have to be made. Acting CEO, did you want to comment on the timing and whether we should defer it?
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. I think it's always better to go to the state government with an adopted position of council. So if the council deferred making a decision tonight, but allowed the advocacy to occur on behalf of council with a draft report, that wouldn't be taken as seriously as it would otherwise be, because it hasn't been approved by the council. And of course, in the meantime, the tender process already commenced by Development WA is continuing, and we understand that they have an urgent need to start construction of the courts or finish the construction by about April, I think, or thereabouts, certainly early to mid next year. So I think it is important that we do adopt a position and deliver that to Development WA as quickly as possible. We are trying to get a meeting with the Director General, Gail McGowan, and I understand the Mayor may have spoken to her office today, but she's currently on leave, but due back next week. So we will be contacting her office again as early as next week to try to get a meeting and more information from her.
Councillor Powell?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. Firstly, how closely does the site for the proposed temporary netball courts align with the proposed Sea Smurf site? Is it exactly the same, or is there an overlap?
Councillor Powell, it is on it, but it's on it. It's on the site. Did you want to speak further?
Through you, Mayor Taylor, it's on the site. It's a little bit closer to Roberts Road than the site, so that's it. And I've just researched the green hatching as well, and that's just regrading, so it's not any hardscaping for the previous question.
Councillor De Vries.
Through you, Mayor Taylor, this is addressing the free community use of the courts, which I believe is, it said the hard courts will be provided with lighting to allow for after-hours community use. And then in relation to condition 4, the agreement must address free community use of the temporary hard courts, including free floodlights use. Could you just clarify something about the cost of it and whether in fact that is a demand that we would make or whether we would be paying for the floodlights? Because I think I read somewhere that there could be a cost to council, to the city of Subiaco. Thank you.
Through you, Mayor Taylor, it is a recommendation and the condition that we're seeking that the applicant, the Department of Finance and Education, put in the facility so the community can use it. Should that happen and someone book it out, there might need to be a cost-sharing arrangement for the use of those lights after hours. However, we're asking for them to be funded by the state government.
Through you, Mayor Taylor, this is just an aside about the floodlights and lights being on. Is there any possibility that we could ask Bob Hawke College to have some lights going off sometime during the night? Because I have driven past late at night and the lights are blazing and it's right next to the park. So I don't know whether that's, just as an aside, something that we could look at about the impact on bird life and so on. Just that's just something that I've meant to mention, but it came to mind. Thank you.
Any other further questions on this item? Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, look, I actually had a couple that I was going to follow up on the last one. Look, the point 2 of the officer's recommendation is that it be supported for an alternative location. Is that sufficient? You know, if we don't know where the location is it, you know, how can we actually support it? Don't we need more information, you know, about what the alternative is likely to be if we don't support this?
Through you, Mayor Taylor, what we're saying is that there's potential for an alternative location. We're not locking anything in, and something would need to come back to council to be considered. So it's more working towards a different location, and there are characteristics of playing courts that the Department of Education would need to consider, how the students walk there and so forth. So there's more work to be done.
Thank you. On an entirely different sort of subject, it would appear, I think, that the Education Department is going to be spending quite a bit of money. Do we know how much on these temporary courts? And then are they likely to accept a condition that says that that these courts then, you know, may have to be demolished and the land returned to Subiaco?
Through you, Mayor Taylor, the estimated cost for the courts is $1.79 million. The imposition of a condition is not by agreement from the Department of Education. It's a decision by Development WA, who are the decision maker. So if they are aggrieved by that condition, funnily enough, they can apply to the State Administrative Tribunal. However, we think that it's an appropriate condition in this instance.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor, and through you. Could you clarify, please, Manager of Planning Services again, I think, There was an original design for the Sea Smurf that was in contemplation, and that was rejected, as I understand it, by the state government or Development WA, whoever was in charge of approving it, the idea, because it would have involved interruption to the use of the courts when there was perhaps building another stage to the Sea Smurf. But now we have the situation where the state is acknowledging that these courts are temporary and there will be a disruption to the use of the courts, which is exactly the same thing that was proposed or similar to what the city proposed in the first place. And now it seems that the state has accepted this idea. So can you just talk to that, if I have analysed that somewhat correctly? Thank you.
Just in relation to your question, I don't think at any stage, though, Council approved the Sea Smurf proposal, so it wasn't something that we took as a council decision that was then rejected by the state government, just to clarify that we're speaking about the same thing.
Just speak to that, please, Mayor. Yes, I'm aware that there was no approval. I just said it was a proposed design or an idea that was on the table or that was put to the state. That's my understanding and my recollection of what's happened this year, in fact. And the most recent rejection of that way of proceeding because the state did not want any disruption to the use of the courts when another couple of stories was built potentially on top of the first stage of the Sea Smurf as it was in contemplation at the time. Thank you.
Yeah, my understanding is there's aspects of it that the state didn't support, but in terms of it going ahead or not, that was a council decision for it to kind of end in its process. So in terms of what was proposed as a fixed council decision to be discussed with the state government, because council at no stage endorsed that, it could only be done from a proposal base as opposed to a decision, and some of those matters that came back from the state weren't able to be ironed out as such because we didn't have a council decision to work as a basis point. Did you have further comment to add on that?
Yep, and through you, Mayor Taylor. Yeah, so there was no formal decision made by the state government with regard to the temporary relocation. It's important that should, in any event, this be approved, that it be of a temporary nature to give the city some ability to continue to negotiate into the future. We understand that there will be difficulties and some challenges arising from other temporary facilities, but they're not insurmountable. So it's essentially a last gasp that if they are approved, they are only temporarily approved, and perhaps the city will be in a different position in a few years down the track if that does occur through the decision-making process.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Taylor, and thank you for that answer. But I don't think that actually addresses exactly the question that I asked. And it was indeed this year that we were told that the state required a Sea Smurf to be constructed in one stage and would not accept a two-stage development. And the reason for that, as I understood it, was that they did not want the disruption to the use of the courts. Now, I don't know what the state told the city. I'm only stating what I recall the city or the staff told us in earlier reports about this, and that was just the point that I was asking for clarification on, if my memory of that was correct. And leading on to the point that it seems, therefore, the state now is accepting the same possibility that they rejected before, that the temporary courts will be unavailable for use at some stage when and if a Sea Smurf is built in the future. Thanks.
Through you, Mayor Taylor, the proposal that the city was looking at wasn't looking at, ours weren't temporary courts, it was about that we were going to have the courts there, but then of course if we then built on top of them, they wouldn't be able to be used, and that the concern was in relation to then there wouldn't be a place available in relation to putting courts while that development was there. And therefore the education department or the college wouldn't be able to use the courts. In relation to the temporary courts, in my discussions when I was acting CEO with Development WA and the counterpart, it was made clear that if the temporary courts needed to be relocated, that then they would have to look at another site and effectively spend the money again to put temporary courts on another site. But this application is in relation to temporary courts where our proposed development was a two-stage development and then reconsidered as a one-stage development, but they were permanent courts being put in. So slightly different, but you're correct in terms of their concern about no longer those courts being available. But Development WA, in my discussions with them, were of the view that if the temporary courts had to be relocated, then they'd have to find another site, relocate them again, and they'd incur that cost again in relation to the temporary courts.
Councillor Powell?
Yes, thank you, and through you, Mayor. We do have other hard courts in the city. Has there been any discussion with Development WA or the school whether they could use those, as temporary courts rather than doing this project?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. In general discussions with the school, they considered the location of the courts. They need to be close by, and that needs to work in with the period scheduled for the students as well. So I believe they considered other sites and potentially using Lords. However, that's they do need to then bus students there, and that can eat into the schedule, especially when you have only a 40-minute schedule, even if that's doubled. So I think there were some preliminary discussions, but it's my understanding that the Department of Education and the Department of Finance have identified this site as the most acceptable to them, which is why they've put the development application in.
Councillor Mansfield?
Thanks. So I guess I'm asking through you, Mayor Taylor, to the planning staff that have been involved in the negotiations with the state government on this site. If the state spends the 1.79 million and constructs the courts in the place that they've outlined in the report, what do you think the likelihood is that they will dismantle those courts and that site will become some sort of co-shared facility that the city might be involved in the future?
Thank you, through Mayor Taylor. Look, I can't comment on the state's intentions on what they might do, and that might change into the future. We've recommended a temporary condition, so it opens up an opportunity for it to be reconsidered. So I can't comment on the potential for that to be extended or not.
Thank you. Perhaps I can answer it by saying, look how long transportables stay on in schools as classrooms.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, it's a very interesting conversation going on. I mean, the first question I would ask is, does this deserve to have further public consultation? The city agreed for them to build a school on Kitchener Park, not on Subiaco Oval surrounds, on the Oval or the surrounds. That's the first question. Second one is on page 47, you can see the size of the courts here, which is encroaching partially over the land that was under discussion involving the city. But if you go to the attachments, the plan now goes all the way down to Roberts Road within metres of it. So that, did we find that, can we shore that up please, as a question as to what area they're talking about? I'd also put another question to the staff. Do we think it's absolutely ridiculous to think they're going to put it there and then pull it down later on? has this got any parallels with the state government wanting to build a bitumen car park on Rosalie Park temporarily and then pull it out later on? Damn well looks very close to the same scenario. I think, well, I won't debate, but I'll put those questions to you. Has there been any serious debate about pushing it, if they have to, further north if this has to be built? I believe it should be public consulted, but if it went further north to where that podium was going to be, which they've now decided basically not to build, then it wouldn't be encroaching on the city potential land. Because once it's built over that, I think we're pretty sure that that's not going to happen again. So was there any serious conversation about pushing it further north up to the footpath, directly north? Please.
Thank you, and through Mayor Taylor, I can't recall any discussion on pushing it further north. What I would comment on is it's likely in the position it is in to maintain the green link to the north of the college. So it's likely there. So there's continued access through Subiaco to Subiaco Oval and to Muller Park. It is slightly further south than the master plan, the draft master plan identifies, and that's the location that was chosen by the Department of Education. So I'd say the likely reason is to maintain the green link, which is why it's in that position.
And, have there been any discussions with him about doing a joint venture with Perth Mod? Do they have enough land to build this sort of thing as well? Were there any discussions about that?
Through Mayor Taylor, not that I believe, no.
No, there is another one. You've mentioned Lord, so I won't talk to that one just yet, but to protect our interest to some extent in the Oval, we put up a proposal to heritage list Subiaco Oval and its surrounds. It does include its surrounds. So has there been any conversation about the actual heritage value of the Oval and its surrounds when somebody wants to construct something like this?
Through you, Mayor Taylor, the heritage considerations are on the use of Subiaco Oval. So what's interesting is that Subiaco Oval was used for active sports and playing fields, and this is an approach which is similar to that heritage listing. This would need to be considered by the Heritage Council and their advice provided to Development WA as the ultimate decision maker, as it is on the state heritage list. I believe there are considerations regarding the bundo of the Oval and the northern experience, which is probably why it's also been pushed to the south on Roberts Road. Again, it's also considered to be a temporary approval with the 10-year condition, so that may also alleviate some heritage concerns for the future.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. I hope this is my last question. Look, in the letter from the school, in the attachments, it says the proposed temporary hardcore development will be open to the community outside of school times, consequently keeping the intended purpose of 304 Roberts Road as a reserve for sporting use. Now, unless they provide lighting, how much is that actually meeting the promise of what's been said? Unless they actually provide, sort of an ability for the community to use those facilities for quite a bit more than just a little bit after school.
Through Mayor Taylor, that's absolutely why we're recommending a condition that the Department of Finance and Education put lighting in there so the community can use it for greater hours. I believe that even with the current hard court that they have, that is used by the community during after school hours as well. So there is some benefit. There'd be more benefit with lighting on there, especially in the later summer seasons when it is nice and warm outside.
Councillors, we'll move to C5 on page 54. Draft Local Planning Policy 3.18, exercising discretion under Clause 12 of the deemed provisions. Do I have any questions on C5? Councillor Hammersley?
Nice.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, that was me asking you to turn it on and at the...
Thanks. I was just looking at the report item number C5, attachment number 2, which is the marked up version of the amended policy. Just had a couple of questions arising out of that, and the first is on the pages aren't numbered, so it's a little bit tricky, but it's under objectives, and it says to ensure site and development requirements contribute to positive heritage outcomes during the development of heritage places and properties within heritage areas. And I just wondered why the words heritage places and properties, heritage places and with there, they don't seem to be defined terms. And also that it's small a heritage areas, and I wondered if that is different from the definition of heritage area, which is capitalised.
Thank you. And through Mayor Taylor, a heritage place would be a place actually listed on the heritage list, so it captures those. Do take your point on the capitalisation of the words to make it more clear in the objective for heritage areas, as that is now a defined term through the track changes. So we will make that. One other typographical area that we picked up was in the appendix. There was a number 1 missing in clause 12, and that was through Councillor Jennings picking that up today. So that was a typo, and that will be rectified for the agenda for the council meeting.
So can I just clarify then, heritage place and heritage property, does that have a definition or need a definition, or is that something that in the future, when people come to have to try and apply this policy, they'll know what that means?
Thank you. And through Mayor Taylor again. So yeah, we will clarify what a heritage place and a heritage area and a heritage list is. So essentially, if you're a heritage place, you're on the list, and it's a singular, generally a singular place, like Subiaco Oval, for example, or a specific development or house. And a heritage area is like the Union or Redford Heritage Area. So it's a larger group of properties.
Okay, over the page, halfway down in the marked up, it talks about when a development application for a heritage place within a heritage area requests the exercise of discretion pursuant to clause 12 of the deemed provisions, the local government should. I was just wondering why the word should has been chosen rather than something like will or must.
Thank you. And through you, Mayor Taylor, policies have discretion, so you can't mandate generally through a policy. These words were provided following legal review as well, so it was words that we accepted from the legal review.
Any further questions on C5? Councillor Powell?
There's a diagram explaining of the appropriate discretion, and it shows a 2-storey heritage building with a 4-storey building behind with discretion to allow to 6 stories. Is that correct? Is that what we may be looking at, having a 2-storey with a 6-storey building immediately abutting the rear of it?
Through you, Taylor, that is one example. So what the example shows is that where development can't be realised because of a heritage element, that development area is then transferred to another site to actually protect the amenity of that heritage without any guidance and without any document. That discretion is still there for any applicant to consider and make a proposal.
So just to, sorry, thank you, Mayor. So just to be clear, that would be what would be available to applicants in other areas. In any case, that would be a normal level of discretion, 50% discretion, which may be available, you know, sort of in a non-heritage area as well.
Through you, Taylor, this doesn't apply to non-heritage areas. This is only for heritage places and heritage areas.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any further questions on C5? Councillor Hammersley.
Yeah, I'm just on that same Appendix 1, or the examples all together, and I'm just wondering why examples if they're not complete, as in all the examples. How do they help decision makers? And secondly, do they not just encourage people to come and ask for 6-storey buildings if you put something like this on a piece of paper?
Through you, Mayor Taylor. Look, providing examples provides some guidance to the decision maker and applicants on what can be requested. So with no examples, the deemed provisions allow for that discretion to be considered. And if we didn't do it, then if we didn't set the clear policy to say that that exact area that you would have had developable should then be transferred to another site, there could be another discretion or additional discretion. So this is not to say that it's going to be 6 stories. It's just saying that 2 stories could not be built there, so that 2 stories is transferred somewhere else. It might be that that's considered through a setback, which there's another example there. It might only be 1 story be transferred. It just provides applicants and developers with council's position up front. Otherwise, then there's a policy void in that sense, and it's up to proponents to essentially create the discretion and policy on the run. So it's impossible in planning sense to list every example because every development is unique. We've just considered a couple which we think are prevalent. We did also consider the City of Fremantle's policy, which has been tested in the tribunal as well, and this is modelled off something that they have in place.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. Through you and to the Manager of Planning Services, I just ask you, I think to that point, would this be correct that in relation to the marked up version of the policy in that's 3.1b, I mean, that sets out in words what the Appendix 1 or Appendix 1 illustrates. So it's saying that, you know, where the development potential is limited by the heritage thing, then that can be, you know, you can only transfer that development potential to that extent. That's it. That's trying to limit the discretion. That's my understanding. Is that correct?
Yes, and it says that the development potential should not exceed that what is lost from maintaining the heritage place. So yeah, it's a clear provision.
If there's no further questions, I'll move on to C6. So C6, City Events Calendar 2021 on page 59. Any questions on C6? Councillor Powell.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mayor. It appears the events cost about $20,000 odd. I was just wondering if there was any idea of how much is generally recouped in ticket sales, so what the actual bottom line is.
Through you, Mayor Taylor, I will take that one on notice, and I'll provide a response in regards to that.
If there's no further questions, I'll move on. So we'll go to C7, Draft Bike Plan 21 to 25, public consultation on page 64. Any questions on the bike plan? No? So I'll move to C8, Nicholson Road Streetscape improvements between Rosalie Street and Hensman Road on page 67. Thank you. Questions, Councillor Mansfield?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Taylor. We received an email from Ms. Rachel Torre this afternoon. She is the owner of the Whole Food Circus Cafe, and she lodged the petition a few weeks ago through council. She has asked for, I guess, consideration to be given to a number of aspects of one of the options that's outlined in the report. Is it better for me to go through and ask staff whether they would consider some of those aspects, or is it better for me just to forward her email to staff and then they can respond?
Director Millard?
Through you, Mayor Taylor, we'd be grateful if you could forward those through so we can look at them in more detail. Thank you.
Questions on C8? Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor, and through you. Just where the road, the current, or there's no parking, but there's roadway on the north side of Nicholson Road to the west of the laneway, that's proposed to be built out in, I think, most of the options, but certainly in option 4. What will prevent, illegal parking on the verge, because I can anticipate that could be an issue, and what would be the proposal if that's a concern to staff at all? Thank you.
Manager?
Yes, so through you, Mayor Taylor. So what would be proposed for that build-up, like you say, to ensure that parking compliance is ensured, because obviously that does fall within the sight lines for vehicles exiting that laneway. What we propose to do would be some landscaping and probably some hard treatments to also deter vehicles from mounting that curb and parking that verge, which would likely be something like bollards or the like. But we'd look at that as part of the overall landscaping treatment within for whatever's appropriate for the area.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for that answer, and through you, Mayor. Could you just give an indication of the time period for the performance of the work, so that, the businesses in the area, you'll probably notify them, but I think it might be of interest to people to know the duration of the works. And secondly, I think you might have answered this question already in a workshop, but sorry, I can't recall the answer. When will the works be commenced? Not hopefully in the Christmas period or, the trading. So thank you, if you could speak to that.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. Yes, so I guess it would depend on the option that was eventually resolved by council, but if it was to be option 4, what we'd probably intend to do is the first element of works, which would be really to ensure that compliance aspects done. So that would be the build out on the northern side, and also probably that nib between the Whole Food Circus and the Perth Party Hire. That would probably be about 3 days work. We'd probably do that in November if we can get our designs finalised, well before the Christmas trade period. The more extensive works we'd probably look to do early in the new calendar year, probably February, March. But again, until something's decided and we'd finalise the designs, it's hard to give a firmer time frame for that.
I have a question. In the executive summary, it talks about the city receiving 2 petitions on the matter, one from Whole Foods Service and the second from residents, but it doesn't have the numbers there. What are the numbers for the petitioners for the Whole Foods Circus and for the second petition as well? Sorry.
Just for some assistance, I'm looking at page 68 of the staff report, which does seem to articulate the numbers. So,
Yes, it's covered in page 68 there. So midway along the page, you've got the first petition that was received, which had 1,874 signatures, which was lodged on behalf of Whole Foods Circus. And then you had the second petition that was received subsequently, which had 31 signatures, which was from residents in the nearby area. All covered on that same page.
Thank you. I also note that we have some potential development across the road from Whole Foods Circus on the corner with a possible new business there. Is that new business going to affect the modelling done on making this area of road safer and better for parking, etc.?
No, I don't see it having any real impact on any of the proposals here.
Councillor Hammersley?
Just carrying on from that theme, I know that the new owner of that building has been very proactive and engaged with the community. I was invited but was not able to attend because I was out of town. But are the staff able to give us any idea of what it is that owner is? Have they filed an application, development application, and do we have any idea what they might be wanting to do on that site?
We might get that taken on notice and pass back. Councillors, do we have further questions on C8? Councillor De Vries?
This question relates to the proposal by Whole Foods Circus owner that the post box be moved. Would that require permission from Australia Post, and how easy would that be to be arranged?
I believe you're correct. You would have to request that of Australia Post. I'm not sure of how easy a process that is and how likely that would be. So, yeah, I can't really comment much more than that.
Any further questions on C8? Councillor Hammersley?
Yes, with respect to the submission of the petitions, I was just interested to know what analysis has been done of the petitions and if it's even relevant to our considerations. But it does appear to me on its surface that the Whole Foods Circus petition does not in any way comply with the requirements of petitions that are put before this council. It may not matter. It's perhaps... But I was just wondering if anyone had looked at that.
I think the question was, is the Whole Foods Circus petition compliant, and has anyone looked at that? I think we'll take that on notice. Councillor Nash?
In terms of holistic urban design for this area, the fact that I think there's no increase in parking bays proposed, is that considered by officers to seriously be complying with the brief that I think we put forward, and that this is addressing the concerns, which one of them was that there wasn't sufficient parking.
Manager for Transport.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Taylor. Unfortunately, I think you were out of most of the workshop when we did explain a lot of this. So obviously, through all the options, we did look at trying to increase the parking supply, obviously for that immediate area in there in Nicholson, which obviously is subject of particularly the first petition received. Obviously, through that assessment, based on the required sightlines for all the intersections, including the exiting vehicles from the laneway, it was determined that there wasn't any of the other locations that could be changed or to facilitate parking in a safe manner that we can be compliant with Australian standards. So essentially, there was nothing further that could be gained without any changes to the laneway, which I think is articulated in the report.
So just to confirm, any additional parking would require changes to the laneway, such as making it one way or doing something like that. Okay, thank you. Councillor Hammersley.
Can I just confirm, I think what we were told in the workshop fairly clearly, and I don't know if more work was done after the workshop, but on page 70, as I understand, the conclusion is that there is in fact no parking shortage in the area. And if that's the case, I might have just not read it well, but I mean, we always need to look forward. I presume there's no anticipation that there's going to be further businesses built in the area, so that we're not expecting in 10 years' time or 5 years' time a shortage of parking.
Councillor Hammersley, I think that goes to the question that the staff took on notice earlier. There is another business moving in across the road that is part of the reason why I think that got asked earlier. And if I throw to the acting manager, he might get to answer it.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor, that's actually a local centre under our local planning scheme. So there's probably, it's to service the local community, so there's no perceived large demand for additional parking in there. So if something does come through and a development application comes through, that development application will need to provide parking on its own site. We're not looking at a regional attractor here. In saying that, if there is a business that comes in that does require more parking, then that will need to be considered in that development application.
Councillor Rowe.
Yes, I sort of raised the question as why we bothered doing this, because we haven't achieved anything at the end of the day. We do know that the basis of this change here has been the success of the business on the south side of the road. So I'd raise the question to staff, could we do some work on changing that laneway to be one way to the north, so we can pick up at least 3 car bays on the other side of the road? You've got this nice crossover indicated on this plan. Why can't we do that? It seems that's what they're looking for. With on here, you've taken away a car bay out the front of the business by the looks. So they're going to look at this and say, what have we done? So could we consider what would be involved in moving that laneway to the north, just one way?
Manager for Transport and Infrastructure.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. Again, this was discussed in the strategic workshop, because at that workshop we did provide options which did include changes to the laneway and showed how many parking could be available for there. And it is touched on in the report, where it does say a change to the laneway, whether you prevent access or just make it one-way northbound, you would be able to gain 2 bays and possibly a third, but we can't confirm until we hear back we have a final design to give to Main Roads. So we did make that very clear, that if you did change the laneway, you could yield at least 2 parking bays, but that is the only way you could. But from that workshop, we did gauge the interest from council and basically got the very strong recommendation, or the strong direction, that that was not something they wanted to entertain, and that's why we've drafted the report to reflect that.
I just have a question on that, because the laneway restriction did look like a inexpensive option in the briefing that I had, because I was not in the workshop due to another mayoral commitment, but was able to have the briefing from yourself. So thank you for that. It did look like there was 4 options being presented to council. There wasn't decisions made in that workshop, was there? Or it was just more the influence on how you were going to write the report?
Through you, Mayor Taylor, it was based on the feedback from the workshop, so a decision wasn't made, but it was something that we felt to. We put it in the report to include the laneway restrictions, but not put it as an option.
Thank you. So just to confirm, the laneway restrictions is talking about making it one way, which would have safety implications around not having, cars coming out of a laneway at the same time as trying to go into a laneway that's already in that congested location, and also had a zero cost attached to it. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Taylor, I think it was in the region of about $10,000 to make alterations to that laneway.
So $10,000, and the cost of, I assume we would certainly need to do some consultation on that. So consultation costs, or is that included in the 10 grand?
10,000, through you, Mayor Taylor, the 10,000 would just be for the physical works.
Thank you. Councillor Nash?
Yeah, look, my apologies in advance if this question was asked at the workshop. I unfortunately couldn't be there, but I have noted that there's a crossover on the north side of the street that leads to a fence. Has it been considered removing that crossover to provide additional parking on that north side?
Through you, Mayor Taylor, that is correct. We have taken into consideration in the options.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. My understanding was that you staff had, at least if there's no formal consultation has been done with the nearby residents and people who use the laneway or whose driveways go onto the laneway, that they have effectively indicated their view almost unanimously that they do not support a change to the laneway so that it's one way as being discussed just now. Is that correct? Thank you.
Through you, Mayor Taylor, that is correct, and that was the subject of 31 residents signing a petition.
And was it not the case that there were 1,872 people on the other petition that supported the closure of the laneway?
Councillor Nash, I think we have had that number confirmed, so thank you. I think we might save this for questions and we can debate it next week when we will be making a decision of council on this matter. Any other further questions on C8? I'll now move on to C9, and I do note that there was a number of questions taken on notice regarding C8. I note Mr. Torres in the gallery, that's all. So those questions are taken on notice and staff prepare them during the week before our council meeting next week. So councillors, we'll move now to C9. On page 73 of our agenda, Corporate Business Plan, Annual Progress Report. Do I have any questions on C9? Councillor De Vries.
Through you, Mayor Taylor, this is more just a compliment, I suppose, in looking at the report from Technical Services on the focus area 2, parks, open spaces and places, and that so much of that report says the project standing is above average. So this is just a congratulations to Technical Services. Thank you.
Okay, take that as a compliment. Any other further questions on C9? Yeah, Councillor Hammersley.
Yeah, thank you. I see that really one of the main things that is not being successfully progressed is the two-way Robertson Hay. And I think we've all seen in the EMIB this week that we're going to get no assistance from the state on that. They have made a decision that it's not in their list of priorities. So I just wondered whether the staff think we need to do anything about the work project, or whether it just should sit there and for the next 10 years and see what happens. It's really just a housekeeping question.
Councillor Hammersy, because of Developments WA's presentation to us as part of the deputation on the master plan, where they did actually strongly support, well, as strongly as I've seen them do it, strongly support the two-way of Hay and Roberts. I think we as a council need to work out what we kind of want to do, rather than, like you're saying, should we just kind of go, oh, well, it's off, or whether we should just say, well, we really want to do it. And I think we do have some momentum with Development WA saying that as part of their master planning. We can continue to advocate, and I have done so, that we still want that, because that still remains a decision of council, that we are to advocate for two-way Hay and Roberts. So I think the way that the master planning will work around Subiaco East can really only be done in an intelligent way if they do modelling using how that road's going to work out. And if Development WA are saying that they would consider it to be additionally contribute to the success of the project, then I think that gives us some really strong momentum to get back to the state government. Councillor Hammersy?
Thank you. Yes, Development WA were very supportive, and in fact you can tell from what they said in their body language that they're disappointed that it's not happening. Just as we're all pretty disappointed with some of the other non-holistic planning that's going on in Subiaco East. But maybe I misread the letter in the EMIB today, or that was there, but I understood that to be a fairly firm rejection of the prospect that funding would be provided to do this fairly expensive task. So it's just really a housekeeping question. Do we just leave it there, or do we need to acknowledge that in some way? That's all.
Through you, Mayor Taylor, I suggest that we, or advise that we do leave it on there as a project, because I think we should still strongly continue to advocate for the two-way, and certainly as officers and as the Mayor has alluded to, that at every opportunity we do advocate for the two-way of Roberts and Hay.
Further to that, I'd also like to say that as soon as I know who the Lord Mayor of Perth is, I will be calling them and saying, would you like West Perth to be slightly more exciting? Because we can work together on that, and then we can double team the how we get some of these things done. I think the connectivity between West Perth and Subiaco East area has some important synergies that we can leverage off each other on that. Further questions on C9? I'll move to C10 then, ordinary council meeting dates on page 79. Any questions on ordinary council meeting dates? No. I'll then move to C11, recruitment of the Chief Executive Officer, page 82. Questions on the CEO recruitment? Councillor Stroud?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I have a question through you. I always like to go back to the source of these things, and a good place to start is actually our Local Government Act. And interestingly, it actually says that it is the local government that is to employ, or is really to take responsibility, the CEO and so on. But interestingly, it then refers to the council, and apparently our two main roles. And I quote 5.362, a person is not to be employed in the position of CEO unless the council believes that the person is suitably qualified for the position and be satisfied with the proposed employment contract. So my question is, when I look at the officer recommendation, and I believe this could probably fit with 3G, can staff take on board to include conduct, background, including qualifications and referee checks? Or do you want a proposed amendment by me for next week?
Thank you. Through the chair, look, happy to amend 3G to include qualifications, but obviously that is a very important part of the selection process and would have been done in any event.
Further questions on the recruitment of the CEO? Councillor Hammersley.
Yes, I was just interested in number 2, and it says that a procurement process to select a recruitment consultant for council endorsement. What will the criteria be for that selection? Will we see the criteria before that selection process starts, or do we just get told after the event with a report telling us these are the recommended choices, or how does that work?
Through the chair, the selection criteria would normally be undertaken by the administration and would include obviously reputation, size, scope, quality of staff, cost, proposed timetable and working relationships with the council, those sorts of things.
Yes, point 6 refers to the contract of employment and the industry model contract, and it says reviewed by the city lawyers. I'm happy if you take this on notice, but who are the city lawyers that actually looked over our past? Who do we normally use for this? And who looked over our past contract? Thank you.
Yeah. Through you, Mayor Taylor. I don't know that this service is provided anymore, but what we did with the previous CEO, and it could have possibly been the previous 2, is they were the industry model contract through WALGA, and we used WALGA's services to help us review those contracts. What we're proposing to do this time is to use the city's lawyers, review it, and I think the acting CEO would then be putting it as part of the discussion of the workshops. Was that correct?
Thank you. Through you again, Mayor, will Council have an opportunity to have a say on what lawyers we use? Thank you.
I think the important thing is that professional lawyers' advice is sought based on the industry contract, which is provided by WALGA. We would need to go to one of the lawyers on the legal panel. I assume we have a legal panel, Director? So provided that the legal advice sought is from one of the members of the panel, it would be the most appropriately qualified in order to provide that advice.
Thank you. Just to follow up, so we could assume then that a qualified employment lawyer who could assist us not only with the contract but with KPIs that are smart could be developed so that we have a very clear relationship between us and whoever's chosen.
Well, through the chair, I would have thought that a lawyer is not the appropriate person to be developing performance indicators. I would have thought that that would best be done with the recruitment consultant together with the councillors at a workshop. I don't think they're going to be that difficult, personally.
Further questions? If there's no further questions, I'll just like a 2-minute adjournment, please, to speak to Deputy Mayor Stroud.
about this important topic?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Stroud, and through you. If it's a WELGA standard contract that we're proposing to use, and I would have thought that's been vetted by lawyers, why does the contract have to be re-vetted by lawyers? Just, you know, a bit of an out there question, I guess, but if we're just filling in blanks in the schedule, you know, amounts, names, addresses, dates, that kind of thing. Thank you.
Through the chair, normally it would be to see if there's any special condition that the council may wish to insert in the contract to ensure that you've got the most contemporary views on employment contracts, because we don't know necessarily the last time the WELGA contract was renewed. So those are two principal reasons, but it's to ensure that you have the most current information available on contracts, and that suitable provisions are there that reflect the council's desire.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to C12. This is matters for information on page 90. Do we have any questions? Sorry, I told you I was trying to speed it up. Hold on. Apologies. C12, financial statements, page 86. Do we have any questions? Yes, Councillor Hammersley, and followed by Councillor Jennings. Thank you.
Thank you. This is just a quick one. In the schedule of accounts, it might need to be taken on notice. Page 31 of 37, I noticed that there's an invoice for the live streaming solution for council chambers, which was just under 35,000, which from memory is very similar to what we were told it would cost. But I was just wondering, was that the total cost of the solution, or was that just one part of it?
Through you, presiding member, we'd need to just take that on notice.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and through you. Just a question about the financial activity statement report, and that is on the attachments at PDF page 208. It's saying, which may be a good thing, I'm not saying it's one way or the other, but it probably is good, that the operating expenditure, it's 264,000 under the budget. Is that, yeah, that's just the year to date under. So what's the explanation for that? Or maybe there's a whole lot of explanations, and if there is, don't bother to go into it. But if there's sort of a general theme, then if you can explain that, thank you.
Through you, presiding member, you're picking up the overall total. We normally provide comments if there's a variance. I think it's 50,000 per the items above.
Any more questions? Thank you, Councillor De Vries.
Through you, Deputy Mayor Stroud, this is just regarding the new bishop damage to the fixtures. Is that something that the city will be bearing the cost for the repair of? I just read in the EMIB that certain lighting fixtures and air conditioners were removed when they left.
Through you, presiding member, we really should take that question on notice, and we would normally deal with our tenants in a confidential manner.
Any more questions? Okay, thank you. Let's move on to C13, page 90. This is matters for information. Are there any questions? No? Okay, then let's move on to item 7, which is meeting. Meeting closed to the public. Procedural motion 7.18 of the meeting procedures local law that the meeting be closed to the public pursuant to section 5.232C, D and E, 3I of the Local Government Act 1995, while item 7.1 is considered. Can I have a mover and a seconder?
The question is to suggest, Deputy Mayor, that if you preempt this by possibly asking, will there be any questions? There may well be, but there may not be, and then we don't have to go do the behind closed doors thing. So I'm just suggesting that.
I suspect in this matter, after the deputation, there will be. I certainly have some, so I believe we will go behind closed doors. Thank you. So can I please have a mover and a seconder for this item? Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you, CEO. So Close the meeting. I believe I need to come out from behind closed doors, or it's not really... No. Do I need to say it officially that we are now coming out from behind closed doors? Thank you. Okay, item 8, thank you. I declare the City of Subiaco Council Agenda Briefing Forum of the 13th of October 2020 closed at 8:12 p.m. Thank you, councillors and staff.